morning I left, I made coffee first. That detail still gets me. The whole marriage was falling apart at the seams. I had 3 bankers' boxes hidden at my sister's place in Hoboken. My attorney had been on speed dial for 6 weeks, and I stood in that kitchen on the 14th floor and waited for the Nespresso to finish its cycle. Force of habit, I guess. 9 years of mornings will do that to you. I set the mug on the counter. Didn't drink it. Then I laid my key fob, my building access card, and the spare key to his office on the Italian marble next to it, in a neat little row. Like I was checking out of a hotel. I picked up my bag. Just the one bag, a Celine tote I bought with my own money before I ever met him, and I walked out. By the time I reached the lobby, my phone was already buzzing. By the time I got into the Uber, it hadn't stopped. By the time I crossed the Hudson, his father had called 4 times. He told me once, early on, that I'd never survive without the infrastructure he provided. That's the word he used. Infrastructure. Like I was a small municipality that needed his funding to keep the lights on. I want to tell you what happened next, but first you need to understand what kind of man says something like that to his wife and means it as a compliment. My husband's name is Sterling Vance. If you're from the Chicago financial world, you know that name. If you're not, here's what it means. 3rd-generation wealth. His grandfather built a regional insurance empire in the 50s. His father turned it into a holding company, and Sterling was handed the executive chair at Vance Capital Partners at 34 years old and told to grow it, which he did. The man was genuinely brilliant with money. I won't pretend otherwise even now. I met him when I was 29. I was a financial analyst at a mid-size firm in the Loop, good at my job, trying to make partner before 35. A colleague brought me to a fundraiser for some hospital wing his family was endowing. Open bar, Millennium Park in the background, August air thick with the smell of the lake. Sterling was in a grey suit with no tie, and he was the most composed person in any room I'd ever walked into. He laughed at something I said within the first 4 minutes. Not the polite laugh of a man who wants something from you. A real one, surprised out of him. We dated for 2 years. We got married on a Saturday in October at a venue in the Gold Coast that his mother chose. I wore a dress I loved. My mother cried. My best friend Rosalie gave a toast that made everyone laugh and then immediately cry. It was a beautiful day. I keep having to remind myself it was a beautiful day. Because what came after has a way of rewriting everything before it, if you let it. The first year was good. The second year was fine. By the 3rd year, I had quietly stopped going into the office because the social obligations of being Sterling Vance's wife had become, without my really noticing it, a full-time job with no salary and no title and no performance reviews, just an endless rotation of dinners and galas and weekend trips with his colleagues, and the unspoken expectation that I would be charming and appropriate and never say anything that complicated the room. I remember calling Rosalie from the bathroom at some event in Lake Geneva, sitting on the cold tile in a $4,000 gown, and she said, "What's happening to you?" And I said I didn't know. Which wasn't entirely true. I did know. I just wasn't ready to say it out loud. What was happening was that I'd been slowly, methodically, with great affection and zero malice, been converted from a person into a function. The thing about Sterling was that he never yelled. That's important to understand because it took me a long time to name what was happening precisely because there was no yelling, no broken dishes, none of the things you're taught to look for. Instead, there were small corrections. My opinion on the infrastructure bill at dinner with his partners. Sweetheart, that's a little simplistic. My wanting to consult at a former colleague's startup, that's a lot of time away for something that probably won't go anywhere. My getting my hair cut shorter, silence that lasted 2 days, no explanation until I grew it out again. Nothing was ever forbidden. It was just that everything outside the role had a cost attached to it, a temperature drop, a withdrawal. And I'd spent so much time, so much careful energy, managing those temperatures that somewhere along the way, I'd stopped noticing I was doing it. His business partner, a man named Conrad Hale, came to our apartment for dinner one evening that second year. Conrad was old money, old manners, the kind of man who refers to his wife as the better half and thinks it's endearing. At some point, I made an observation about one of their client portfolios. I'd overheard them talking and I knew the sector well. It was literally my professional background. And Conrad looked at Sterling with this expression. Not hostile. Worse than hostile. Amused. "She keeps up," he said. Like I was a golden retriever who'd learned a new trick. Sterling smiled. Didn't correct him. That was the night something in me went very quiet. Not angry, not sad. Quiet in the way that means the decision has been made and your emotions are just catching up. I want to be precise about the timeline, because this is where I know people will have questions. I didn't leave that night. I didn't leave for another 4 years. I know how that sounds. But here's what I was doing in those 4 years. I started quietly, carefully, rebuilding what I'd let atrophy. I told Sterling I wanted to take some online certifications to stay current in my field, framed it as something that would help me be a better hostess at his firm's events, which was grotesque in retrospect but effective. He agreed, barely paying attention. I enrolled in a CFA continuing education series. I reconnected with Rosalie, who by then was a compliance director at a bank downtown and had been patiently, loyally waiting for me to resurface. I also started paying attention. Sterling traveled frequently. When he did, I used the time in the apartment well. I'm not going to detail every decision I made during those months because frankly, some of it is still in litigation. But what I will tell you is this. A man who believes you are not paying attention will leave things visible that he would otherwise hide. A second laptop on the home network, wire transfer confirmations in the recycling before he remembered to shred them. Phone calls taken in the kitchen after assuming I'd gone to sleep. Sterling's father, Harrison Vance, had founded a private investment vehicle alongside Vance Capital in the early 2000s, a subsidiary most of their public clients didn't know existed. What I began to piece together over months, cross-referencing what I knew about the firm's public positions against movements I was observing on documents I was not supposed to have seen, was that this subsidiary was being used to execute trades in advance of material, non-public information. Classic insider trading. Specifically, they had relationships with 3 board members across 2 healthcare companies, and they were trading ahead of FDA announcements. I'm a credentialed financial analyst. I knew exactly what I was looking at. I also knew that the moment I confronted Sterling directly, or the moment I did anything visible, everything would lock up, assets would move, lawyers would circle. I had watched Harrison Vance operate for 9 years, and I knew that family's first instinct was containment. So I didn't confront anyone. I documented. I should tell you about Rosalie because she's part of this story in ways I haven't fully articulated. When I told her, a Tuesday, her lunch break, a booth in the back of a Thai place near her office, she sat across from me and listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Okay," she said. "What do you need? Not, are you sure, or that's a serious accusation. Just, what do you need? I needed a private attorney who handled both family law and securities matters, or who could refer me to someone who did. I needed somewhere to store documents that was not my apartment. I needed someone who wouldn't breathe a word of this to the 7 mutual friends we'd accumulated through Sterling's social orbit over 9 years. She had me in front of an attorney named Beverly Cho within the week. Beverly was small and quiet and asked questions like a scalpel. She told me in our first meeting that whatever I decided to do, divorce, report, both, neither, she was there to help me think it through, not to push me. She outlined what the divorce would likely look like given the asset structure, what protections I had as a spouse, and what the federal whistleblower statutes looked like for securities fraud cases. She told me she had a colleague at the SEC's enforcement division who was thorough and discreet, and that if I wanted to move in that direction, the timing of everything would need to be careful. Your goal, she told me, is to be financially disentangled before they're legally constrained. Once federal charges land, assets get frozen, Everything you're entitled to as a marital partner becomes inaccessible while the case works through the courts. That can take years. I said I understood. You have time, she said. Use it precisely. What I did over the following 8 months I did slowly and without any visible change to my behavior. I kept going to Sterling's dinners. I kept being charming. I made an elaborate birthday dinner for his father in March, and sat at that table and smiled for 4 hours and came home and wrote down 3 new account numbers I'd quietly observed on a document Harrison left on the sideboard when he stepped out to take a call. Beverly helped me calculate what I was legally owed from the marital estate. It was a significant number. We began moving it, carefully, incrementally, nothing that would trigger an alert. Under a certain threshold per transaction, spread across several weeks, directed into an account in my name that predated the marriage and that I had never mentioned to Sterling because he'd never asked. I also had Rosalie quietly loop in her contact at the SEC. Not formally, just a conversation, over the phone, between a compliance professional and a former colleague at the agency. Hypothetical in nature. Exploratory. The response, filtered back to me through Rosalie, was that the information I had described would be very significant and that the agency had been looking at that family for some time. I kept that very close. The night I finally told Sterling I was leaving, I did not give a speech. I did not explain. I had learned by then that explanations with Sterling were just openings for negotiation. He would find the thread in anything I said and pull it. We were sitting in the living room. It was a Sunday in November. He was reading something on his phone and the lake was dark outside the window and the apartment was very quiet. I said, "I want a divorce." He looked up. He had the expression of a man who had been expecting this at some abstract future date, but was surprised by the specific Sunday it arrived. He said, "You're not serious." I said, "I have a copy of the retainer agreement with my attorney in my bag if you'd like to see it." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You have no idea what you're walking away from." "I'm not walking away from it," I said. "Half of it is mine. I'm just going to go live with my half somewhere else." He laughed. It wasn't the real laugh from August in Millennium Park. It was the other one. The one that meant he thought you were confused about your position. "You'll regret this inside of a month," he said. "You've been out of the real world for years. You don't have the connections, the income, He gestured at the apartment in a way that was supposed to encompass everything. The view, the marble, the Nespresso, the infrastructure. I said, "I'll manage." I went to the guest room. I'd already moved the things that mattered to Rosalie's spare bedroom over the previous 3 weeks, a bag at a time. The following 6 weeks were not uncomplicated. Sterling's initial posture was that this was a phase. He sent flowers twice. He texted things that were technically conciliatory but had an undercurrent of, "When you're done with this." His mother called to ask if we'd considered counseling in a tone that made clear she was asking on behalf of the family rather than out of genuine concern for my well-being. His father called once. Just once. He was very calm. He said he hoped I'd be thoughtful about the way I characterized their business dealings in any legal proceedings. He said the family had been very generous with me. I thanked him for calling. I hung up. I sent Beverly a text that just said, "Harrison called." She replied, "Noted. I'll document it." I had by then completed transferring my share of the liquid marital assets. Beverly had reviewed every transaction. I had not touched the accounts tied to the subsidiary structure. That would have been theft, not divorce. And I was very clear with myself and with Beverly about the line. What I had taken was legally mine. Nothing more. Beverly also sent a formal referral to the SEC at the stage, with my documentation attached. Not in my name on any public record. Protected under the federal whistleblower program, which shields the identity of reporting parties and, in certain cases, provides a percentage of sanctions recovered. Beverly explained this to me with the same careful neutrality she applied to everything. "You're not doing this for the money," she said. "No," I said. "But it's worth understanding your protections." The investigation moved faster than I expected. I was living in a furnished apartment in Lincoln Park. mine, in my name, with furniture I'd picked out alone for the first time in nearly a decade, when Rosalie called me on a Thursday morning in February. "Check the Tribune," she said. Harrison Vance and 2 board members of a healthcare company called Meridian Diagnostics had been indicted by a federal grand jury on charges of securities fraud and conspiracy. Sterling was named as a subject in the investigation, not yet indicted, but his access to the firm's accounts was frozen pending the proceedings. I read the article twice. I sat down on the couch I'd bought at West Elm 3 weeks earlier, and I felt, I want to be accurate about this, not triumphant. Not relieved exactly. Something quieter than both of those things. Like a pressure I'd been carrying so long I've forgotten it was there, had just gently, finally, released. I called Beverly. "The divorce proceedings just got more complicated," she said, "but not for you. The next months were not clean or easy. I want to be honest about that. The asset freeze created a legal tangle that took Beverly 8 months to work through. There were hearings. There were Sterling's attorneys arguing that my transfers had been improper, which Beverly systematically dismantled by showing that every transaction fell within the legal parameters of marital asset division under Illinois law, completed before any freeze order was in place. There were moments when I sat in a conference room and looked across the table at Sterling and barely recognized him, not because he'd changed, but because I had, and the distance between who I was now and who I'd been in that apartment was so much larger than I'd understood while I was living it. Sterling's attorneys eventually moved towards settlement rather than trial. I think once the federal case took shape and it became clear that the government's evidence was substantial, prolonging a contentious divorce was not a risk worth adding to everything else. We settled. I won't give you numbers. I'll say Beverly looked satisfied. Sterling's father was convicted on 2 counts in November. His sentencing was 6 months later. Sterling himself reached a deferred prosecution agreement. He cooperated with the government in exchange for no prison time, substantial fines, and a lifetime bar from the securities industry. The 3 board members pled separately. I was not in the courtroom for any of it. I want to tell you about the week after the settlement was finalized, because it's the part of this story that matters most to me. Rosalie came over to the Lincoln Park apartment, and we ordered deep dish from Lou Malnati's and opened a bottle of Sancerre that had been sitting on my counter since Beverly said we were close. We sat on the floor with the pizza box between us like we were 23 again, and at some point Rosalie said, "Do you know what you want to do now?" And I did know. I've been knowing for about 2 years, but there's something about not being allowed to want things clearly that makes them hard to articulate even to yourself. I told her I wanted to go back to work, in finance, but differently. I'd been talking to a small woman-owned advisory firm in the West Loop that works specifically with women navigating divorce and financial transition. They'd been looking for a senior analyst with credentials and direct experience. I had both. "You're going to be terrifying at that job," Rosalie said. I laughed. "The real kind. There is no clean ending to something like this. I want to be clear about that, because I think stories like mine sometimes get packaged into something neater than they really are. I still have the occasional dream where I'm in that apartment, and the lake is outside the window, and everything is quiet, and I can't remember why I was supposed to leave. I still have moments in a conference room or at a dinner where some old reflex activates. The one that says, make it smooth, manage the temperature, don't complicate the room. I have to consciously override it every single time, and the overriding doesn't always feel powerful. Sometimes it just feels exhausting. But I am also sitting right now in an office in the West Loop that has my name on a plaque outside the door. Cassia Wren, Senior Financial Advisor. I have 4 colleagues who are sharp and funny and don't require anything from me except competence. I have Rosalie 12 minutes away by train. I have a couch I picked up myself and a key fob that only I hold a copy of. Sterling called once, 8 months after the settlement. I don't know why. Beverly had advised no contact and he'd been good about it until then. He said he'd been thinking about what went wrong between us. I told him I thought we had different ideas of what a marriage was for. He said he thought maybe we could have a conversation sometime. Not about the case, just to talk. I said I'd think about it. I haven't called back. I don't plan to. Some doors you close not in anger, not even in sadness, just in clarity. You set the key on the counter. You pick up the bag you bought with your own money. You walk out into whatever is next. The coffee, I've decided, you leave behind. There's a version of this story where I'm the lucky one, where I just happened to marry into the right family, noticed the right documents, called the right attorney, and walked away with half of something I never really built. I've heard that version from people who don't know the full picture, and I understand why it's easier to frame it that way. But I think about what actually happened, and luck isn't the word that comes to me. Sterling didn't lose because I was clever or because I got fortunate. He lost because he made a choice over and over again for years, the choice to believe that the people around him were decorative, that his wife was furniture with good manners, that loyalty could be manufactured by controlling someone's access to money, to purpose, to their own judgment. He built his entire life on that assumption, and when the assumption was wrong, everything built on top of it came down too. That's not punishment. That's just how weight works. You can only stack so much on a false foundation before the math catches up. What I think about more, though, is Beverly's line, the one she said in our first meeting in that quiet office off Michigan Avenue. She said, "You have time, use it precisely." I've thought about that a lot in the years since, because I didn't fight Sterling loudly. I didn't confront him or expose him or make a scene. I just got precise. I got precise about what I knew, what I could document, what I was legally owed, and what I was going to do with all three. Precision isn't glamorous. It doesn't make for a satisfying revenge fantasy. But it is, I've come to believe, one of the most powerful things a person can be. Rosalie used to say that the years I spent inside that marriage weren't wasted, that everything I learned about how men like Sterling operated, how money moves, how power protects itself, that was education, the expensive kind. I wasn't sure she was right while I was living it. I'm sure now. There is something that happens to you when you spend years making yourself smaller to fit inside someone else's idea of who you should be. You don't notice it happening in real time. You just gradually become fluent in a version of yourself that isn't quite accurate. And then one day, you do something. Lay 3 keys on a counter, make a phone call, sit across a table from a woman who asks what you need without flinching, and you remember. You remember that you had opinions once, that you had a career, instincts, a voice that didn't require editing before it left your mouth. Getting that back isn't dramatic, it's just incremental. One decision at a time. One morning at a time where you make your own coffee and drink it, or don't drink it entirely on your own terms. I'm not the same person I was at 29 in Millennium Park, laughing at something a man in a grey suit said. I don't think I'd want to be. That woman was smart and capable and had no idea yet what she was capable of. I know now. And that knowledge cost me a decade of my life, and I would pay it again, because the person sitting in this office with her name on the door outside earned every letter of it. What I want, if there's anything useful in my story for anyone else, is justice. The quiet years count. The years when you're gathering yourself, when nobody can see what you're building, when you're just getting precise. Those count. Don't let anyone tell you that the slow years were wasted time. Sometimes the slow years are the whole point.